The camera opens not on fog or runways, but on silence. A close-up. Blood-streaked hands frozen over a control yoke. A cracked oxygen mask. Eyes open, staring at nothing. The faint hum of engines. Then the screen cuts to black. A title card appears, 18 hours earlier. Now we see the same airfield in eastern England, pre-dawn, March 1944. The briefing room is packed with young men smoking cigarettes, their faces lit by a single flickering projector. A map of Europe looms on the wall like a death sentence. The target city, Bremen. The intelligence officer steps forward, his tone flat and rehearsed. Bremen, U-boat yards, heavy industrial complex, flak density severe, Luftwaffe presence confirmed along the coast. Expected losses, 12 to 15%. Nobody moves. 12 to 15% means 4 or 5 planes won't come back. That's 40 to 50 men. The math is simple, deadly. Captain Robert Harlow sits in the second row, staring at the red line crossing the North Sea. 31 years old, 23 missions. 3 more, and he rotates home. He's written the number on the inside of his flight jacket in pencil. Every morning he checks it. Every night he erases it and writes it again, like some kind of ritual. Superstition was everywhere among bomber crews. Men urinated on tail wheels for luck, refused to fly without lucky charms, delayed missions to retrieve forgotten talismans. Harlow's superstition was simpler. Never celebrate until you land. Next to him sits Second Lieutenant Eddie Monroe, 20 years old, chewing gum with mechanical rhythm. He leans over and whispers, "You think they're lying about the losses?" Harlow doesn't look at him. They always are. Behind them, the navigator, Sergeant Thomas Avery, is folding a letter into his jacket pocket. His wife is 8 months pregnant. He hasn't told anyone. He writes her every night, but the last 3 letters he hasn't mailed. He keeps them in his flight bag like insurance. If he doesn't come back, someone will send them. That's the deal. Across the aisle, the bombardier, Jimmy Pike, sits with his hands pressed together, like he's praying. He's not. He's counting. 22 missions. He needs 8 more. His hands shake slightly. Everyone notices. Nobody says anything. The radio operator, Tech Sergeant Frank Merrick, flips a silver coin over and over. Heads. We make it. Tails. We don't. He's flipped it 14 times. It's come up tails 9 times. He keeps flipping anyway. The briefing officer clears his throat. "One more thing. You'll be flying in Miss Charlotte today." The room goes quiet. Someone in the back mutters, "Not that one." Harlow's jaw tightens. Miss Charlotte has a reputation. The last crew that flew her didn't come back. The crew before that lost 3 men over the target. Maintenance says she's mechanically sound, but airmen don't trust mechanics. They trust ghosts. There were beliefs among crews that certain aircraft were cursed, that extra passengers brought bad luck, that some planes just wanted to kill you. Eddie stops chewing. "We flying a cursed ship?" Harlow stands. "We're flying what we're assigned. Let's move." Outside, the tarmac is cold and wet. The bombers sit in rows like sleeping giants. Miss Charlotte is third from the end, her aluminum skin pocked with patched bullet holes. The nose art shows a smiling woman in a red dress. Someone has scratched a small cross next to her face. The crew gathers near the tail. Harlow inspects the engines, while the crew chief watches nervously. "She good to go?" The crew chief hesitates. "Engines are fine. Hydraulics are patched. Number 3 runs rough, but she'll fly." "Rough how?" "Just rough." Harlow stares at him. The crew chief looks away. Inside the aircraft, the air smells like old sweat, gun oil, and something metallic. Blood, maybe. Nobody says it, but everyone notices. On the bulkhead near the waist gun, someone has carved the initials JK and a date, February 12th, 1944. That was 6 weeks ago. Nobody knows who JK was. Frank Merrick climbs into the radio compartment and finds something wedged behind the panel. A folded photograph. A young woman holding a baby, on the back in faded pencil. Come home safe. He stares at it for a long moment, then tucks it into his vest pocket. He doesn't know why. Eddie climbs into the cockpit and straps in. His hands are sweating. He wipes them on his pants and mutters, "This plane doesn't want us here." Harlow settles into the pilot's seat, adjusts his harness, and flips the ignition switches one by one. The engines cough, sputter, then roar to life. The third engine backfires, sending black smoke across the tarmac. The whole fuselage shudders. Over the intercom, Jimmy Pike's voice cracks. "Did we just blow an engine?" "No," Harlow says calmly. "She's just waking up." The control tower crackles to life. "Miss Charlotte, you are cleared for taxi. Godspeed, gentlemen." Eddie glances at Harlow. "Godspeed." That's what they said to the last crew. Harlow doesn't respond. He pushes the throttle forward. The bomber rolls toward the runway, engines screaming, vibration rattling every rivet. As they line up, Harlow sees the chaplain standing near the tower, making the sign of the cross. Eddie sees it too. "That's not a good sign." "Nothing about this is a good sign." The green flare goes up, clearance to take off. Harlow's hand tightens on the yoke. He takes one breath, then another. The engines roar at full power. The bomber accelerates down the runway, faster, faster, then lifts. The wheels leave the ground. England falls away beneath them. And for the first time, nobody says a word. The formation crosses the Dutch coast at 22,000 feet. 36 bombers in tight combat box formation. Each one a silver speck against endless gray sky. From the ground, they look like a slow-moving constellation. From inside, they are 10 men in a freezing metal coffin. Inside Miss Charlotte, the temperature is 40 degrees below zero. Ice forms on the oxygen masks. The intercom crackles with static and breath. Harlow keeps his eyes locked on the lead aircraft 200 yards ahead. Formation flying this tight is the only defense they have, overlapping fields of fire from 50 caliber guns, layered like armor. Break formation, and you die alone. Eddie sits beside him, scanning the sky for fighters. His breath fogs the windscreen. He wipes it away with a gloved hand. Then it fogs again. The ritual repeats every 30 seconds. "How long to target?" Harlow's voice is flat over the intercom. Thomas Avery, the navigator, checks his charts in the cramped compartment below. 18 minutes. We cross into German airspace in 4. Nobody responds. 4 minutes, until the flak starts. In the nose compartment, Jimmy Pike hunches over the Norden bomb site, making micro-adjustments. His hands are shaking again. He presses them flat against the metal frame to stop them. It doesn't work. The bombardier's position was statistically the most dangerous on a B-17. Exposed in the glass nose, first to take fire, highest casualty rate. Pike knows the numbers. Everyone does. Behind him, Frank Merrick sits at the radio station, flipping that same silver coin. He stopped counting the results. It doesn't matter anymore. Then the first shell bursts. Black smoke blooms 200 yards to the left. A dark flower against white cloud. Then another. Then 10 more. The flak field opens up like a wall of fire. German 88mm anti-aircraft batteries below calculate altitude, speed, wind, and send up a curtain of steel fragments designed to shred aluminum and flesh. The shells burst at precise intervals, creating kill zones the bombers have to fly through. There is no dodging. There is no evasion. You fly straight, and you hope. The first impact hits Miss Charlotte without warning. A flak burst punches through the left wing, tearing a 2-foot hole in the aluminum skin. Fuel sprays into the slipstream like mist. The plane lurches hard to the left. Harlow fights the controls, pulling her level. His hands grip the yoke so tight his knuckles turn white through the gloves. "Number 2 engine losing pressure," Eddie's voice cracks. Another burst, this one closer. The fuselage shudders like something hit it with a sledgehammer. A fragment punches through the radio compartment, missing Frank Merrick's head by 6 inches. It embeds in the bulkhead behind him, still glowing, red-hot. He stares at it, frozen, his ears ringing. Over the intercom, the waist gunner screams, "Fighters! 9 o'clock high!" German Focke-Wulf 190s dive out of the clouds like hawks. 4 of them, guns blazing. Tracer rounds arc across the sky in streams of light. The 50 caliber guns on Miss Charlotte open up in response, a deafening roar that vibrates through the entire airframe. Shell casings clatter to the floor like rain. One of the Focke-Wulfs breaks off, trailing smoke. Another makes a head-on pass, cannon fire stitching a line across the bomber's nose. The plexiglass shatters. Jimmy Pike doesn't even have time to scream. A 20mm shell tears through his chest, throwing him backward into the bulkhead. Blood sprays across the bomb site, across the charts, across everything. He slumps forward, dead before his body stops moving. In the cockpit, Harlow hears the impact. "Pike! Pike! Talk to me!" Silence. "Pike is down!" The navigator's voice is tight, controlled panic. "He's gone!" Eddie's face goes pale. Jesus Christ. "Stay on station!" Harlow's voice cuts through like a blade. "We hold formation!" Another flak burst. This one directly beneath them. The explosion lifts the entire bomber 10 feet. Metal screams. The ball turret gunner, suspended below the fuselage, takes the full force. Shrapnel rips through the turret's thin armor, shredding hydraulic lines and flesh. He doesn't scream. He just stops talking on the intercom. Ball turret's not responding. The waist gunner's voice is shaking now. "I think he's dead." Harlow doesn't answer. He can't. He's fighting to keep the plane in the air. The control surfaces are sluggish, damaged, barely responding. Number 2 engine is smoking, losing power. Fuel is hemorrhaging from the left wing. They're 20 miles from the target and already falling apart. Then the third hit. A flak shell detonates directly behind the cockpit, in the narrow passage between the flight deck and the bomb bay. The blast tears through electrical conduits, control cables, and the main oxygen line. Fragments punch through the cockpit bulkhead like bullets. One catches Eddie in the throat. He grabs his neck, eyes wide, blood pouring between his fingers. He tries to speak, but only gurgles. His hands drop. His head slumps forward against the control panel. Harlow turns. "Eddie!" No response. Blood runs down Eddie's flight suit, pooling in his lap. His eyes are open but empty. Harlow's breath comes fast, shallow. His vision tunnels. For 5 seconds he forgets where he is. Then training kicks in. Autopilot. He reaches for the C1 autopilot panel, flips the engagement switch. The Honeywell Sperry system hums to life, stabilizing the aircraft, making micro-adjustments to keep it level. The yoke moves on its own now, ghostly, as if Eddie's hands were still on it. Over the intercom, voices overlap, screams, static, prayers. The waist gunner is hit. The tail gunner reports his oxygen line is severed. Frank Merrick tries to send a distress signal, but the radio is dead, shredded by shrapnel. Thomas Avery, the navigator, crawls forward through the wreckage to check on Pike. He sees the body, sees the blood, and stops. His hands shake. The folded letters in his jacket pocket press against his ribs like accusations. He turns back, stumbles, collapses against the bulkhead. A fragment he didn't notice has punctured his abdomen. He presses his hand against the wound. Warm blood soaks through his glove. In the cockpit, Harlow is alone. Eddie dead beside him. The plane shaking, smoking, falling. He looks at the instruments. Altitude dropping, airspeed unstable, formation slipping away ahead of them. He reaches for the throttle. His hand freezes halfway, a sharp pain in his side. He looks down. A jagged piece of flak, 3 inches long, embedded below his ribs. He didn't even feel it hit. Blood darkens his flight suit. His vision blurs at the edges. He blinks, forces himself to focus. The autopilot is holding them steady. The target is ahead. They can still complete the mission. His hand falls from the throttle. The strength drains from his arms. And then everything goes black. The bomber flies on. The operations room at RAF Thorpe Abbotts falls quiet as the clock passes 1700 hours. Outside, the sky is gray-white with low cloud, the kind of English evening that swallows sound. Inside, the duty officers huddle around the plotting table, counting planes. 36 went out this morning. 31 have returned. 4 confirmed lost over the target. 1 unaccounted for. Flight Lieutenant Graham Hayes stands near the radio console, listening to the static. He's 26, prematurely gray, haunted by the same ritual every mission, counting the living, writing letters to the dead. He lights a cigarette and waits. The radar operator, a quiet Scot named McLeod, sits hunched over his scope in the corner. The green sweep rotates once, twice, painting nothing but empty air. Then a faint blip appears at the edge of the screen. He leans closer. Contact, single aircraft. Bearing 270, range 40 miles. Hayes steps over. Ours? Speed and altitude match. Could be a straggler. Hayes keys the radio. Unidentified aircraft on approach bearing 270. This is Thorpe Abbotts Tower. Identify yourself. Static. He tries again. Unidentified aircraft. You are entering controlled airspace. Respond immediately. Nothing. McLeod watches the blip creep closer on the scope. Still no IFF transponder signal. But the flight profile, it's definitely a heavy. Could be battle damage to the radio. Hayes nods. Battle damage was common. Radios shot out, antennas severed, entire electrical systems destroyed. But something about this one feels wrong. The approach is too steady, too perfect. Like it's being flown by someone who isn't injured, isn't panicking, isn't even awake. The operations room smells like burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. It's past midnight now, but nobody has left. Hayes sits at the table, staring at a stack of reports he can't bring himself to write. Across from him, Major William Garrett, the group's operations officer, stands with arms crossed. His face is carved from stone. You're telling me that plane flew itself home? Hayes doesn't look up. I'm telling you what we found. 10 dead men. Autopilot engaged. Perfect landing. Autopilot doesn't land planes, Lieutenant. I know that, sir. Garrett slams his hand on the table. Then what the hell happened out there? Hayes finally meets his eyes. I don't know. The door opens. Captain Douglas Marsh enters, carrying a leather briefcase. He's the group's engineering officer, thin and precise, the kind of man who trusts numbers more than people. Behind him comes Dr. Alan Pierce, the base surgeon, still wearing surgical gloves stained dark with blood. Garrett turns. "Doctor, time of death?" Pierce sets down his medical bag and pulls out a notepad. His handwriting is tight, controlled. Captain Harlow died approximately 4 to 5 hours before the aircraft landed. Massive internal hemorrhaging from shrapnel wound. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Monroe, died roughly the same time. Severed carotid artery. The navigator, bombardier, and 3 gunners all died within minutes of each other, likely during the same engagement over the target. 4 to 5 hours, Garrett repeats slowly. So Harlow was dead before they even crossed back into Allied airspace. Correct. Then who brought the plane home? Pierce looks at Hayes, then back to Garrett. Nobody, sir. They were all gone. Silence fills the room like fog. Marsh clears his throat and opens his briefcase. He pulls out a clipboard covered in diagrams and notes. I inspected the autopilot system. The C-1 was engaged and functioning normally. But here's the problem. He taps the diagram. The C-1 can hold altitude, maintain heading, and keep the wings level. That's it. It makes micro-adjustments to the rudder, ailerons, and elevator to maintain straight and level flight. It was designed to work with the Norden bomb site during bombing runs, not for navigation or landing. Garrett leans forward. Speak English, Captain. The autopilot can't descend. It can't lower landing gear. It can't extend flaps. It can't align with a runway. And it certainly can't execute a landing approach and touchdown. But Miss Charlotte did all of those things. Yes, sir. That's the problem. Hayes stands and walks to the window. Outside, Miss Charlotte sits on the tarmac, illuminated by floodlights. Mechanics crawl over her like ants, photographing damage, taking measurements, collecting evidence. The Crash Investigation Board had been convened immediately. Standard procedure for any aircraft accident. But this isn't an accident. It's something else. Garrett lights a cigarette. Walk me through it. Step by step. Marsh flips through his notes. Based on damage assessment and fuel consumption calculations, Miss Charlotte was hit over Bremen around 1100 hours. Multiple crew casualties. Captain Harlow engaged the autopilot shortly before he died, probably to stabilize the aircraft while he assessed the situation. And then the plane just flew. The autopilot held the last heading Harlow set. That heading, by sheer luck or design, aimed the bomber roughly toward England. Wind drift and minor course deviations kept it on track long enough to cross the channel. How long was it in the air after Harlow died? Approximately 4 hours. Flying on autopilot with a dead crew. Pierce adds quietly, the bodies show signs of rigor mortis. They'd been dead long before landing. Garrett exhales smoke. So the plane flies itself across the channel on autopilot. Fine, I can accept that. But how did it land? Marsh hesitates. That's where the evidence breaks down, sir. There's no rational explanation. The landing gear was down and locked. The flaps were extended to landing position. The approach angle was perfect. The touchdown was textbook, centered on the runway, proper speed, proper descent rate. Everything was done exactly right. Could the controls have been damaged in a way that caused this? No, sir. I've checked every cable, every hydraulic line, every connection. Nothing was damaged in a configuration that would accidentally lower gear and flaps. while maintaining a descent profile. Hayes turns from the window. What about mechanical failure? Something jamming the controls into the right position? Marsh shakes his head. Mechanical failures don't create precise landing approaches. They create crashes. The room falls silent again. Garrett stubs out his cigarette and immediately lights another. His hands are shaking slightly. So you're telling me that a plane full of dead men flew across 200 miles of ocean, descended from altitude, configured itself for landing, lined up with a runway it couldn't see, and touched down perfectly in the center line? Yes, sir, Marsh says, quietly. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Garrett looks at each of them in turn, and none of you can explain it. Nobody answers. The door opens again. A young corporal enters, holding a scorched notebook. Sir, we found this in the cockpit. Captain Harlow's flight log. Garrett takes it. The pages are stiff with dried blood. He flips through carefully. The last entry is dated today, written in a shaky hand. 10:57 hours, heavy flak, multiple casualties. Monroe gone, Pike gone, engines failing, engaged autopilot, heading 285. God help us. That's where it ends. No other entries, no record of anything after that moment. Pierce speaks softly. He was trying to get them home, even dying. He set a course for England. And the plane followed it, Hayes adds. All the way. Garrett closes the notebook. His face is pale. This doesn't leave this room. Not a word to anyone. The official report will state that Captain Harlow successfully landed the aircraft before succumbing to his wounds. Crew died heroically in combat. Standard posthumous decorations. Understood? Sir, Hayes starts. That's an order, Lieutenant. Hayes clenches his jaw. What about the truth? The truth? Garrett looks at him with hollow eyes. The truth is that I have 300 men on this base who have to fly tomorrow. And if they think planes are landing themselves with dead crews, half of them won't leave the ground. So the truth stays here. He walks to the door, pauses, looks back at the blood-stained notebook in his hands. Captain Harlow brought his crew home. That's all anyone needs to know. Outside, the mechanics continue their work. Inside the fuselage of Miss Charlotte, they find small things. A photograph tucked behind a panel. Letters never mailed. A silver coin still clutched in a dead man's hand. Evidence of lives that ended somewhere over Germany. But somehow made it back to England anyway. And in the cockpit, the autopilot panel still glows faintly in the darkness. The engagement switch remains in the on position. Untouched. Unexplained. Waiting. He picks up the field telephone. Get the crash crews on standby. We've got an inbound. With no comms. Outside, the fire trucks roll into position along the runway. Medics gather near the ambulances, checking equipment. The chaplain appears from the officers' mess, drawn by instinct. Everyone knows what silent approaches usually mean. 10 minutes later, the bomber breaks through the cloud base at 800 feet. Even from the ground, they can see it's Miss Charlotte. The nose art is unmistakable. But something's wrong. The landing gear is down. Correct procedure. The flaps are extended. Correct procedure. The approach angle is textbook perfect. But there's no radio call. No flare. No signal. Hayes raises binoculars. The cockpit windscreen is shattered. Dark stains streak the fuselage. Smoke trails from the number 2 engine, but it's still turning. The plane descends in a shallow, mechanical glide, as if guided by invisible hands. Jesus Christ, McLeod whispers. Who's flying that thing? Hayes doesn't answer. He can't, because even through the binoculars, he can see that the cockpit is empty, or worse, occupied by someone slumped forward, unmoving. The bomber crosses the runway threshold at exactly the right altitude. The wheels touch down. Left main, right main, tail wheel. In perfect sequence. The engines throttle back. The plane rolls straight down the center line, slowing, until it stops 300 yards from the tower. Then silence. The fire trucks race toward it, sirens wailing. The medics follow. Hayes grabs his cap and runs. By the time he reaches Miss Charlotte, a crowd has formed around the fuselage. The crew chief stands at the hatch, hand frozen on the latch. His face is pale. "What are you waiting for?" Hayes snaps. "Open it." The crew chief pulls the handle. The hatch swings open. Warm air spills out, thick with the smell of blood, gunpowder, and something worse. Death. Hayes climbs inside, flashlight in hand. The beam cuts through the darkness. What he sees stops him cold. The radio operator slumped over his station, hands still gripping the microphone. Dead. The waist gunner collapsed near his weapon. Blood pooled beneath him. Dead. The ball turret gunner, what's left of him, mangled beyond recognition. Hayes moves forward, stepping over shell casings, through the narrow passage to the cockpit. The navigator is sprawled against the bulkhead, eyes open, a folded letter clutched in his hand. Dead. The bombardier is slumped in the nose compartment, face down in a pool of blood that's turned black and sticky. Dead. And in the cockpit, Captain Harlow sits upright in the pilot's seat, hands resting on his lap. A jagged piece of flak protrudes from his side. His eyes are half open, staring at nothing. Beside him, the co-pilot is slumped forward against the control panel, throat torn open. Hayes stands there, flashlight trembling in his hand. The autopilot panel glows faintly in the dim light. The engagement switch is in the on position. Behind him, the medic climbs into the cockpit, checks Harlow's pulse, then shakes his head. He's gone, been dead for hours. Hayes looks at the controls. The yoke is centered. The throttle is set to cruise. The trim tabs are perfectly adjusted. Every switch, every lever, exactly where it should be for a textbook landing approach. "Who flew this plane?" the medic asks quietly. Hayes doesn't answer. He looks at the autopilot again. The C-1 system could hold altitude, maintain heading, keep the wings level. But it couldn't navigate. It couldn't descend. It couldn't lower the landing gear or extend the flaps. It couldn't line up with a runway and touch down in the exact center. And yet Miss Charlotte had done all of that. Outside, the crowd has grown. Mechanics, ground crew, other pilots, all staring at the bomber like it's something unnatural. Someone whispers the word ghost. Someone else crosses themselves. Hayes climbs down from the hatch and walks to the crew chief. "How much fuel was left?" The crew chief checks the tanks. "Maybe 10 minutes worth. She was running on fumes." 10 minutes. If Miss Charlotte had circled even once, she would have fallen from the sky. Instead, she came straight in, landed perfectly, and stopped exactly where she needed to. Hayes lights another cigarette with shaking hands. The chaplain approaches, rosary beads wrapped around his fingers. Did they suffer? Hayes looks back at the bomber, at the blood streaking the fuselage, at the shattered glass, at the 10 men who flew out this morning and came back as ghosts. "They were dead before they crossed the channel," he says, quietly. "Every single one of them." The chaplain's face goes white. "Then who brought them home?" Hayes doesn't answer, because he doesn't have one. The chapel is cold. Gray morning light filters through narrow windows, casting long shadows across wooden pews. 10 flag-draped coffins rest in 2 rows before the altar. The names are painted in white on small placards: Harlow, Monroe, Avery, Pike, Merrick, and 5 others. The chaplain stands at the pulpit, Bible open, hands trembling slightly. He's conducted 23 funeral services in the past 6 weeks. This one is different. Everyone knows it. "We commend these men to God's mercy," he says, voice barely steady. "They gave their lives in service to their country. They did their duty. They brought each other home." In the front row, Major Garrett sits motionless, uniform pressed, medals gleaming. Behind him, 200 airmen fill the chapel. Nobody speaks. Nobody coughs. The silence is absolute. Outside, a 7-man honor guard fires 3 volleys into the gray sky. The sound echoes across the airfield like thunder. A bugler plays taps. The notes hang in the air long after they stop. Hayes stands near the back, watching. He hasn't slept in 3 days. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the cockpit of Miss Charlotte. The blood, the bodies, the autopilot switch glowing in the darkness. Next to him, Captain Marsh leans close and whispers, "They're giving Harlow the Distinguished Flying Cross, posthumously." "For what?" Hayes mutters. "Dying? For bringing his crew home?" Hayes almost laughs. Almost. "He didn't bring them home, he was already dead." Marsh doesn't respond, because there's nothing to say. That afternoon, a closed session convenes in the group commander's office. Only 4 men attend: Colonel James Pritchard, the base commander, Major Garrett, Captain Marsh, and Dr. Pierce. The door is locked. No stenographer. No official record. Pritchard sits behind his desk, a stack of classified reports in front of him. He's 52 years old, gray-haired, with the kind of face that's forgotten how to smile. "Gentlemen, I've read your findings. All of them. And I'm telling you right now, none of this goes into the official record." Marsh starts to object. "Sir, with all respect—" "No respect, Captain. No debate. This is an order." Pritchard taps the reports. "What you're suggesting is impossible. Planes don't fly themselves. Dead men don't land aircraft. And I won't have my command turned into a circus because 3 officers can't accept a simple explanation." "Which is what, sir?" Pierce asks quietly. "Captain Harlow was wounded but alive when he landed. He died shortly after. The crew fought heroically. They came home. End of story." "That's not what the evidence shows," Marsh says. The autopsy results are inconclusive," Pritchard cuts him off. "Dr. Pierce, you said yourself that estimating time of death in combat conditions is imprecise." Pierce hesitates. "That's true, but—" "Then it's settled. Captain Harlow was alive during landing. That's the official conclusion." Pritchard stands, signaling the meeting is over. "We have a war to fight, gentlemen. I need pilots who believe their training matters, that their skill matters, that they control their fate. I don't need ghost stories." Garrett speaks for the first time. "And if they ask questions, then you tell them the truth, that 10 brave men completed their mission and came home. Nothing more." They file out in silence. In the hallway, Marsh stops Hayes. "You going to follow that order?" Hayes looks at him. "Do I have a choice?" "We always have a choice. Not in the Army. But orders don't stop rumors. By evening, the entire base is whispering. In the mess hall, over trays of lukewarm stew, the gunners and navigators trade theories. Some say Harlow flew the plane with his last breath, pure willpower keeping him alive long enough to land. Others say the co-pilot wasn't really dead, that he somehow held on just long enough. A few mention the autopilot, but nobody can explain how it could have done what it did. In the barracks, a young waist gunner named Miller sits on his bunk, cleaning his .50 caliber. Across from him, his crewmate Daniels shuffles a deck of cards, nervously. "You hear what they're saying?" Daniels whispers. "That Miss Charlotte flew herself home. No living crew." Miller doesn't look up. "That's bullshit." "I'm just telling you what I heard." "Well, stop hearing it. Planes don't fly themselves." Daniels deals the cards, his hands shaking. "Yeah, but what if they do? What if the plane knew? What if it wanted to come home?" Miller slams the barrel of his gun on the bunk. "Listen to yourself. You sound insane. You didn't see it, man. I was on the tarmac when they opened the hatch. 10 dead men. All of them. And that plane landed perfect. Dead center on the runway. Not a scratch on the landing gear." Miller finally looks up. "So what are you saying? That Miss Charlotte is haunted?" "I'm saying maybe some planes are cursed. Maybe some are blessed. Maybe we don't know everything." Miller stands, grabs his jacket. "I'm going to the PX. You need to get your head straight." But as he walks out, he passes the window overlooking the flight line. And there, under floodlights, sits Miss Charlotte. Ground crew crawl over her like surgeons dissecting a corpse. And even from here, even through glass, Miller swears he can feel it. Something wrong, something off, something that doesn't want to be understood. 3 days later, Hayes returns to the hangar. Miss Charlotte has been stripped down, every system inspected, every wire traced. Marsh is still there, hunched over diagrams, obsessively cross-referencing data. "Find anything?" Hayes asks. Marsh doesn't look up. "Nothing that makes sense. The hydraulic system was functional. The electrical system was functional. The autopilot was engaged, but shouldn't have been capable of what happened. And yet it did. So what do? We accept it. Or we go mad trying to explain it." Hayes walks to the cockpit, climbs inside. The bloodstains have been cleaned, but the smell remains. Metal and death. He sits in Harlow's seat, puts his hands on the yoke. It's cold to the touch. He closes his eyes and imagines it. Dying, bleeding out. Knowing you're finished. But setting a course anyway. Engaging the autopilot. Hoping, praying that somehow, some way, the plane will bring your crew home. "Maybe it wasn't the plane," Hayes says quietly. Marsh looks up. "What? Maybe it was him. Harlow? Maybe he didn't let go? Maybe he held on, not his body, but something else." Marsh stares at him. "You don't believe that?" Hayes doesn't answer, because he doesn't know what he believes anymore. 1 week later, a new crew is assigned to Miss Charlotte. Young faces, fresh from training, eager to prove themselves. The pilot is a lieutenant named Carver, 23 years old, red hair, cocky grin. He walks the flight line with his crew, inspecting their assigned bomber. When he sees Miss Charlotte, he stops. "This is ours?" The crew chief nods. "Yes, sir. She's been fully repaired. Good as new." Carver walks around her slowly, running his hand along the fuselage, the patched bullet holes, the replaced panels, the nose art, still showing the smiling woman in the red dress. His co-pilot, a kid named Walsh, comes up beside him. "You hear the stories about this one?" "I heard." "And?" Carver looks at the cockpit, at the empty seats where Harlow and Monroe died. "And I think dead men don't fly planes. But maybe, just maybe, good men don't let go. Not until their crew is home." He climbs aboard. The engines start. The propellers spin. And as Miss Charlotte rolls toward the runway, Hayes watches from the tower window. Beside him, Marsh stands silent. "Think she'll bring them back?" Marsh asks. Hayes lights a cigarette. "She brought the last crew back. They were already dead. Maybe that's the point." The bomber lifts off, climbing into gray clouds, disappearing from sight. And in the operations room, a clerk updates the logbook. Next to Miss Charlotte's serial number, someone has written in careful script, "Returned, without crew, March 1944. Cause, unknown." The entry is crossed out, stamped, classified, and filed away. But the legend remains, and every pilot who flies Miss Charlotte after that day carries the same thought, unspoken but understood, that somewhere in the cold machinery and riveted aluminum, something remembers, something watches, something that refuses to leave its crew behind, even in death, especially in death.